Welcome everybody to today's webinar on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, the equity engine of the Inflation Reduction Act. Just a reminder that today's webinar will be recorded. We had hoped to have today's presentation in Spanish, but we've had some technical difficulties on that front. So encourage anybody who has questions and would like to ask them in Spanish to please contact us at e2.org/info. And we will follow up with you as best we can. Paula, if you'd like to share that in Spanish.
Buenos días a todos, bienvenidos al webinar, el Fondo de Reducción de Gases de Efecto Invernadero, el motor de la equidad de la Ley de la Reducción de la Inflación. El webinar del día de hoy será grabado y esperábamos poder tener la presentación y la interpretación al español. Sin embargo, estamos teniendo algunos problemas técnicos para poder ofrecer esa opción en este momento. Por favor, que eso no sea algo por lo que ustedes no escriban sus preguntas en español en el chat a lo largo del webinar. Y si tienen alguna pregunta, pueden comunicarse con nosotros a través de nuestro correo electrónico.
Thank you, Paula. With that, I will start. I'm Sandra Purohit, Director of Federal Advocacy for E2. For those of you less familiar, E2 is a national, nonpartisan group of business leaders, professionals who advocate for policy that's both good for the environment and good for the economy. Today's discussion is on one of those great policies that E2 had helped to get across the finish line in the last Congress. It's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, a $27 billion fund that leverages state and local tribal leaders as well as community lending institutions to target emissions, economic growth, and also equity. Now, E2 has been tracking the clean energy economy for years, and it's clear that a transition to a cleaner economy is happening. It's underway. It can lower energy costs and emissions. But E2 analysis, including a report we're going to pop in the chat, has also shown that a cleaner economy is not inherently an equitable one. And what do we mean by that? For some context, we know that minority households, for instance, face significantly higher energy burdens. So Black households spend on average about 43% more of their income than white households to pay their energy bills, while Hispanic households spend about 20% more. Despite the increase in burden, however, access to clean energy solutions that could lower those costs, whether that's rooftop solar or energy efficiency, is disproportionately lower in minority households, even when you account for income. Looking beyond the household, we see disparities in who owns clean energy businesses, who's employed in clean energy, and who has access to financing and technical capacity to harness all that the clean energy economy has to offer. The good news is that recent federal investments, particularly the historic Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, don't take equity for granted. They're designed to tackle this issue head on. And to find out how, we're excited today to hear from three expert panelists directly involved in the implementation and really the creation of this groundbreaking fund, this engine of equity. We'll get a federal perspective from Ted Toon. He's the senior advisor at US EPA's Office of Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. We'll get the state and local perspective from Cory Connolly, Chief Climate Officer of Michigan's Office of Climate and Energy. And we'll get a lender perspective from Nenha Young, Senior Director of Development and Network at the Coalition for Green Capital. If you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A section, and we'll have time at the end to address those as they come up. Thank you again for joining us. And with that, I'd like to get started. We'll set the stage a little bit. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just take a couple of minutes to describe their role in the their perspective on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund implementation. As the creators, why don't we start? Ted, we'll start with you at the federal level.
Great, thank you so much. Well, thank you, Sandra. and to E2 for inviting me to be here today. Really excited to participate in the conversation. My name is Ted Toon, as Sandra said. I'm a senior advisor here at EPA on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. I joined EPA to help design and launch the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And as Sandra said in the introduction, this is a $27 billion opportunity and challenge for us really to make a significant difference in how we are deploying and financing clean technology and green projects around the country, and also ensuring that that's done in a really equitable way, which we'll talk about in much more detail today. So very happy to be here representing EPA and representing the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund.
Great, thanks so much. And Cory will join us.
Hey everyone, thanks Sandra, and thanks for having me. As mentioned, I'm with the state of Michigan. I lead the Office of Climate and Energy here at the state of Michigan. Our main task is developing and implementing the governor's climate plan with emphasis on implementation of said plan. And about 2 years ago, we were directed the executive directive to lead the state's approach to making sure we maximize greenhouse gas reduction funding to the state of Michigan. So we've been working on that since around each bucket of money, and excited to have the conversation today. And I'll say one thing that doesn't show up in my bio that prominently, but I was once an E2 One Hotels fellow, so it's good to be back.
Thank you very much. And just to touch on that a little bit there, within the $27 billion, there are sort of 3 buckets of funding, and they're really designed to leverage both state and we'll hear from Nenha next on the private capital lending institution component. Nenha.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, E2, for the invitation. And as Cory mentioned about being a One Hotels E2 fellow, I'm currently a fellow. So really excited to be able to engage regarding the 9 to 5 capacity that I have. So really fantastic to join the call. My name is Nenha Young, Senior Director of Development and Network at Coalition for Green Capital. We are an awardee of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. We received $5 billion, or we were awarded, $5 billion for the National Clean Investment Fund. And for Solar for All, we were awarded 2 programs, one in North and South Dakota, totaling approximately $124 million to set up low-income solar program for both states. And just at a high level, our mission is to use public-private investments to accelerate the transition from carbon to clean energy cheaply, quickly, and inclusively. We are building nationwide a clean power platform by, for, and with communities, and we are making energy cheap and accessible across the country for everyday use. And so very excited to be implementers of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and working with our partners on this call. So great to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, all of you. So I touched on it in the intro, but when we talk about equity, we're really talking about multiple things, so multiple facets, as we're trying to create a multi-part ecosystem in the economy that's equitable. Can you share from your perspectives what the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, how is it addressing the issues of distribution, who's benefiting from clean energy, ownership, the business leaders and building up capacity there, as well as workers and labor? We know that we want these people to benefit for clean energy jobs up and down the career ladder. How's the fund helping with that?
Great. I'm happy to start on that question. It's a great question, and it's such a foundational piece of how we created the program. When we established and really designed the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, we had 3 primary goals in mind. First was the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants, of course, which the legislation requires us to do. Secondly is to really think about the benefits and co-benefits of the program. The program overall, about 75% of the benefits of the program must be directed toward low-income and disadvantaged communities. So the program at its core is about equity and ensuring that as this green economy grows, that we're ensuring that the beneficiaries of that the owners of those assets, and that the workers who are doing these projects around the country are all building this green ecosystem in a way that is building up communities that have historically been disadvantaged and excluded from these processes. I think it might help if I step back for just a moment and describe the three programs of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. There are three distinct programs. They are distinct yet complementary. The first, and Nenha here is representing two of these. The first is the Solar for All program. It's a $7 billion low-income solar, 100% focus on low-income and disadvantaged communities across the country. For this program, we have selected 60 grantees who will be doing the work for us nationally. So most of those are at the state level, some are at a regional level, but really understanding the solar markets, really understanding the low-income communities and how to best deploy solar in those areas. The second program, and the biggest, is the National Clean Investment Fund, $14 billion. There we have selected 3 national grantees who will be doing both direct lending and lending to lenders and other financial instruments to ensure that tens of thousands of these green technology and green projects can be completed across the country. You often hear the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund referred to as a green bank. And while we don't exactly use that terminology, I think our National Clean Investment Fund is as close as we get to being a green bank. Again, Nenha is here representing Coalition for Green Capital. They are our grantee that is working primarily with green banks and developing and building out a network of green banks across the country. The third program is the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator at $6 billion. For this program, we have selected 5 grantees, and these are essentially pass-through entities. They will be working with hundreds of local community financial institutions to deploy the funding into their communities. So community development finance institutions, CDFIs, credit unions, green banks, minority depository institutions. Those are the kinds of entities that our 5 grantees will be working with to provide both technical assistance, but also seed capital to begin programs to lend directly into their communities in the ways that they know best will serve those communities. So at its core, equity is built into all 3 of the programs. The Clean Communities Investment Accelerator that I mentioned also is 100% focused and directed toward low-income and disadvantaged communities. We have a specific definition for what that means for our program, as all programs are required to do, but it's a very broad definition that is inclusive of what many other programs, both Inflation Reduction Act, bipartisan infrastructure law, and just regular federal and state programs. It aligns with most of the income requirements of those programs in ways that allows the stacking and combining of programs. It also specifically calls out affordable housing as one entity and one type of asset that would categorically be eligible to participate in our programs. So we're really trying to dig deep, also looking at just individual households and income limits and how they can participate as well based on that, as well as tribal areas, tribal entities, et cetera. So really broad definition. So I'll stop there, but I can't impress enough how much we have baked equity into a core part of what we're trying to do and a core objective of our program.
And Cory and Nenha, from your perspectives, how are you seeing, what are the pieces of this that you see attacking those aspects of equity?
Yeah, I can speak to a couple, and hopefully we'll dive more into some of these, but I appreciated Ted laying out the 3 buckets, so I'll follow the format a little bit. For Solar for All, our office is the recipient of a $156 million award specifically for getting residential solar and community solar to low-income communities and households. So that's very much center stage is kind of the equity and opportunity to participate in that program. We're actually just kicking off we just hired a director. We're kicking off our planning period. So we're going to be taking a ton of input to make sure that we maximize the opportunity for folks and also give everyone an opportunity to give us input. So there will be a lot more on that coming up. We had a couple announcements this week around the new director in our process there. So any Michigan stakeholders or folks looking to work in Michigan, we're the right folks in the Solar for All bucket. I think for us, the state role in some of these others isn't always that clear. I'll probably dig more into that in answering some other questions. But I think on the CCIA, I think we're really, really excited about that opportunity in that program. And it gives us a really obvious opportunity to work with our community lenders. So specifically the 50 plus CDFIs that are in Michigan and the more than 180 credit unions that are in Michigan. So we're working closely with our Michigan Credit Union League and the Michigan CDFI Coalition to make sure they have capacity, are aware of the opportunity, and have support as they pursue the funding, but also as they go to implement and need to develop out project pipelines and truly start doing some lending that they maybe aren't as familiar with. But I think this kind of like mantra around like the CCIA in particular is kind of like how do we get green lending into all communities, and how do we make community lenders green lenders as well. And I think that's a really, really cool one. And I'll say if we had done this webinar in 2.5 weeks, I'd have some pretty fun announcements on that from us. But I leave that as a cliffhanger for folks to stay tuned with what's happening in Michigan.
Thanks, Nenha.
Yeah, I think we all have some great announcements lined up or things that we've already shared. So actually on our website, we have 2 webinars that we did in the past couple of weeks to share some announcements. So on the CCIA front, while we applied, we submitted an application for CCIA, but we weren't awarded it. We also truly believe in having all community lenders be green lenders. And so part of our announcement from last couple of weeks is like within our network office, we have an objective to have at least one economically self-sufficient green lender in every state. And this is definitely like not to compete with other community development financial institutions or credit unions. It's to be complementary. We understand that these resources are going to need as much support from as many nonprofit partners in order to reach the communities that need it the most, as well as building up the technical expertise and capacity. So over the past decade, we've worked alongside our partners within the American Green Bank Consortium. So many of these entities that we're going to be supporting through concessionary finance, technical assistance, and staff support are already in these states, but we want to make sure that every single state has the ability to access these resources in that equitable manner. When it comes to Solar for All, we actually see ourselves as providing support in states where there was limited resources or no applications. So that's how we ended up in the Dakotas, because we see the GGRF funds as funds that all Americans should have access to. And so as a eligible nonprofit entity, we applied on behalf of establishing statewide programs, but the objective over time is to have, again, a self-sustaining entity in the Dakotas that can stand up and operate their own program. And so we are really but we truly see ourselves as stewards of public funds and ensuring, Sandra, to your point earlier, like the clean energy transition is going to happen, but there's no way to guarantee that's going to be equitable. So we hope to be close partners with EPA and the states and just at the federal level to ensure that these funds are distributed equitably and we have a truly just energy transition.
And just from an outside observer, we were obviously hugely supportive of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, but looking at how you've stood up this program, it just feels like the 3 buckets are designed to get money to the ground as fast as possible, as equitably as possible, whether that's specific projects or specific businesses and specific communities, but to do that through facilitators or pass-throughs, I think is the phrase Ted's used, that have roots in those communities. So, the pass-through is the state with Cory and Michigan, and then tribal and local governments, and then with Nenha in the green bank that's in your backyard, or the CDFIs, the community development institutions, the historic entities that have connections to the community. making sure that they're all involved so that as you're assessing projects, there's some sense that it's connected to where these projects are going to take place. And I just think that model is really going to help, just from an outsider perspective, is really going to help with addressing equity and making these successful. So,
hey, Sandra, can I just follow up on something? I had a note that I didn't want to step on the NCIF kind of bucket toes, but we have an incredible asset in the state of Michigan. We have the Michigan Saves, which is our state green bank, our nonprofit green bank that we partner with. And they're a huge partner on all of this with us. And specifically, they're working with the Coalition for Green Capital. So I didn't want that to go unsaid, but it's sort of almost can sometimes in Michigan because of how ubiquitous they are. But that's obviously a key piece of our whole strategy.
And thanks for bringing that up, Cory, because I think to your point, like we are so deep into this work that sometimes we forget to highlight core elements of the work. And so something I did not mention is within our coalition for the National Clean Investment Fund, we have 18 sub-awardees across the country that are what we're calling green banks, so nonprofit lenders. That we will be working with them doing what we're calling indirect investing. So money is funneling from EPA to us through these other sub-awardees or other green banks. But then we will so we're having a parallel path. We will also be doing direct investing into projects. So I think I could talk some more about that in some of the later questions, but to the point at the state level, while there are folks like Cory and his role at the state, they're coordinating. Quite often, states also are partnering with other green banks or other nonprofit lenders. So the equity piece too is just establishing this network of kind of, over the past decade, everyone's been operating or functioning independently. So I think one of the greatest opportunities from the perspective of EPA and the genius of this program is establishing a formal network that we can all work and support, building that can just grow over time. And similar to green banks globally that have been doing this work for over a decade, we finally can have that similar financial infrastructure to do clean energy investments.
I love hearing that. And Sandra, I think you made a really excellent point, and it was by design that what we're attempting to do and what we plan on doing here is really connecting not just $27 billion, but $27 billion plus everything that we can leverage from the private sector. I think everyone on the call today probably reads all the time about all the ESG money out there that's just waiting to get into this game if we can make it a safe space. And so if we can use through our grantees de-risking strategies to attract more funding in, but funnel it through, as you said, the local financial institutions. Anyone who's ever worked with low-income disadvantaged communities knows that trust and relationships is the only way to get business done. And so working through those local entities, connecting the capital sources all the way down to those local entities is going to be key in us delivering on our promise of equity here. So thank you for highlighting that. That's exactly what the intent of the program is.
Yeah, and I just have to say, as we talk to entrepreneurs through E2, there is, for some of the minority business leaders, they've just not had success with traditional financing networks. It's just historically represented in the numbers as well. So having nonprofit entities that are focused on clean energy and serving underserved communities, I think is also just really instrumental. It's providing the capital piece of the puzzle for people to become players in this space in a way that they just haven't been able to do under the traditional system. So just excited about that. I'm going to turn Cory a little bit more and dig a bit more, if you don't mind. We've heard a lot about how the states are a flow through, but can you just kind of give us an illustration of what that looks like in Michigan and working with local entities and green banks, etc.?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll give a little bit of context on how we've been approaching this. I guess I come out of PACE financing world where I watched as most of the PACE lenders went to other markets because they could get easier, like projects that maybe penciled a little bit better than what was in our market, or could develop it out easier, or already had the institutional infrastructure. So I think when we saw this funding available, we wanted to make sure that Michigan was prepared to receive as much of it as possible. We're really well suited for that with Michigan Saves. So it means then we can focus on the other pools of capital that are out there. So we've been, for the last year and a half now, meeting regularly with all of the applicants for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And then after the applicants were selected, all of the awardees or selectees, and then now after they've received the money, all the awardees, and trying to really think about this a little bit as like the way we might approach an economic development opportunity, which is we're going to these national groups and saying, what do you need from us to be able to work in our state? How do we make sure that you have the right relationships? Are there things that the state can do with our resources that could help us drive investments here? And so in particular, I think around the challenge of ultimately we want to crowd in as much private capital as we can, but we need that to meet our climate goals. We need that capital to induce additional clean energy projects that accelerates the transition. And so figuring out how do we bring some state resources to help make sure that we're driving that project development and uptake, and kind of thinking about that on the front end. So that's just sort of like a high level approach. We've been doing kind of a bunch of matchmaking, relationship building, and things like that. And then directly the Solar for All, like that is something that we're working through right now, that the money comes directly to us. On the NCIF side, I think we're trying to figure out kind of what tools and resources, and I'd love to hear from other panelists here on that, but what tools and resources those entities that don't have a local partner like Michigan Saves, so the Power Forward Communities or the Climate United Coalition, and then kind of the direct investment pool from CGC, like what do they need to be able to invest in our state, and how can we help facilitate that? And then on the CCIA, it's been a ton of education and coordination with our Credit Union League and CDFI Coalition to help make sure that they're prepared to provide support to the credit unions and CDFIs. So we've done a bunch of educational events just to let everyone know kind of broadly in the state of Michigan that this is an incredible opportunity, and one that is, if we maximize it, will be crucial to meeting our climate goals. But then we've also done really specific outreach to specific stakeholders like the CDFIs and the credit unions. So yeah, there's almost infinite things to try to do here, and we're trying to figure out kind of the best way to approach it across the board.
And I think that that initial point of, in some respects, $27 billion is historic. It is. It's, I think, double the EPA's annual budget just focused on this issue, but it's not enough. And so designing mechanisms to leverage and to, I think you said, crowd in private capital, and then finding all these different players that can facilitate that distribution and leverage is key. And Nenha, maybe I'll shift to you for a second. Just this month, you guys announced you're officially open for business as the first U.S. national green bank. $5 billion available for investment. It's now stood up. First, congratulations. That's really exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means? And the coalition in the announcement, you talk about wanting to do $20 billion in private public investment, but you've got $5 billion. And so this really speaks to that leveraging piece. So tell us a little bit about the announcement and what it means.
Yeah, so I'll break it down for you a bit. So with the $5 billion award from EPA, $3 billion of that will be done with direct investments. And so that is going to be CGC investing directly into qualifying projects, which I can talk about the qualifying projects in a second. 90 million of that is going to be actually in grants to community-based organizations and lenders through a new initiative that I will our net zero communities program. And then 2 billion of those funds, the remaining funds, will be going to our network partners. So those are individuals who have been the sub-awardees on our application, folks who have engaged in the American Green Bank Consortium over the past years. And then we're also doing an open solicitation to increase the number of network partners. And that includes other nonprofit lenders or state and local government entities that want to establish their own green lending platforms to plug into this program. And so through our direct investment route, we're pursuing deals that are $5 million, $50 million and more. When the projects range between $10 to $50 million, we'll co-invest in those deals. And then when the deals are smaller than $10 million, we will be referring it to our network. So as I mentioned before, either our sub-awardees or folks who become network partners over time. Our objective over the 7-year period of the grant is to, use the $5 billion to seed our capacity to lend upwards of $40 billion. And that's really the power of leveraging. So really at any transaction, we're just a piece. I'll use a terrible metaphor, but we're a piece of the pie. And so we are trying to figure out who else is going to come in and invest with us and allow us to recycle these funds, because that's really where the success of the program over time is, figuring out how to recycle these federal resources to crowd in public support for this clean energy transition. And overall, the goal is creating a national clean power platform across the country that really taps into that question around equity. And so we're really excited to figure out the routes. We did not talk about the eligible projects. So I'll just give you some examples of the types of transactions we're looking to do. So community solar portfolios, small C&I solar portfolios, transmission. Sorry, commercial industrial, transmission, tribal solar and storage, EV fleets, charging infrastructure, water distribution, small utility scale solar plus storage, and standalone storage. So that's just some examples that fit within the qualifying project entities. And yeah, I would encourage you all as well to go into the EPA website, because there's a lot of literature there to talk more about what are the eligible uses of the funds.
Yeah.
And we'll ask panelists to share links to these that we can then share as we send out recording of the webinar. Ted, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think both Nenha and Cory hit on something really important about the program, and that is that the funding is not going out through the usual cast of characters that get federal funding. It is going out in a way, as you mentioned, through nonprofits who are really mission driven. And the idea is to grow the ecosystem of entities that can deliver green financing. Cory hit on it exactly. Maybe you're a credit union out in rural Michigan somewhere, and you've been doing consumer lending and maybe home mortgages for a long time. You've never done green lending. This is an opportunity to bring them into the fold and provide the technical assistance that we've allowed for in this program to get that entity up to speed. How do you underwrite a green project? What is a net zero building? And how do I underwrite and finance that in a way that they're permanently part of this ecosystem going forward and can deliver something to their community that's never been delivered to that community? So it's really about growing and expanding the network in a way that $27 billion is a huge amount of money. It's the largest single investment we've made in this country in dealing with the climate crisis, but it's going to run out. So what happens then? Well, if we've figured out how to leverage and attract the private capital, once they understand that this is a safe space, and once they understand that these are performing loans and there are returns on this and there are community benefits, that's going to be a permanent source of financing that comes into this marketplace well after our $27 billion is gone. So it is lofty to say this, but we fundamentally want to change the way that we are delivering capital to the market, both how we're getting the funding there, who's benefiting from it, and the types of projects that are worthy to get funded. So nothing short of revolution here.
I think that's fantastic. And I have to say also just that, the green banks have been around for a little while, so we have some exposure to what this is going to look like. And I know from a borrowing perspective, one of the frustrating things is that to qualify for loans in a traditional network, there's sort of standard ways of looking at your project. Whereas one of the things I also think is exciting about this is that the Green Bank is open to finding flexible ways, new approaches to coming up with how we're going to underwrite this. What are we going to consider in the creation of these loans in a way that creates new opportunities for borrowers, and again just expands the network of projects and people that can access that. Yeah. You touched on this a little bit, Nina, as part of your implementation is grants, and this is at all these levels. There's a little bit of tension here because we both want these funds to last a long time and to be recycled and be creating growth for many, many years to come. At the same time, there are some communities for whom a loan just isn't going to cut it, and that you need a grant, or a financial institution that needs a grant to figure out the technical piece of how they're going to play in this space. So how have you guys grappled with the notion of how much do we give away and how much are we lending and why?
Yeah, great question. So figuring out a balance, we announced our Community Net Zero Accelerator. Actually, last Friday, my colleagues did a deep dive on this program. So with the accelerator, it's a grant program where we're partnering with communities to accelerate the community-wide approach to what we're calling it the transition to the clean power platform. So we're going to be working with cities, counties, tribes, and other nonprofits that have existing decarbonization and net zero targets. So as Cory mentioned, the state has a plan, but as we're realizing across every state and every region, there's a different and unique approach. And so we want to leverage the GGRF funds to come in to push some of those programs forward. So I have to say, I started off my career as an urban planner. So I worked on 1 million plans. And, we love to have a neighborhood community plan. But the worst thing is when you have no funds to execute the plan. So these are the resources to finally take some of those plans off the shelf, because we know so many communities have them. Dust off the plan, figure out who your coalition is, apply to the program, and then we can provide several $1 million to each community. But the power is that we have the resources from the direct and indirect lending to figure out on a transaction basis what we can do early on. But if not, use these pre-development and technical assistant funds, because that's an eligible use for grants within the NCIF explicitly. That's really what this program is to hold the hands of the communities that have already started doing a lot of the legwork and try to execute any aspects of those plans. And we really need the private sector to be partners here. So as you all are thinking about kind of what are your strengths in the industries or the organizations that you work for, there's going to be a handful of communities across the country that CGC is going to be working with to think around some long-term, even at the level of capital planning for municipalities, how to plug in these resources and figure out integrating them into the clean energy transition.
I think that's really interesting because you can have all the money in the world, but if it's complicated to get, or if you don't have the capacity or the technical expertise to apply for it, or to ask for the grant, or to write the proposal to get the grant, you may get nowhere. And so I think it's really interesting that both at the lending level and then Ted from your design, and the notion of including technical capacity and support for how you get the money is, I think, going to be really important. So exciting to hear that piece.
I think it's really exciting, and I think you hit on exactly. You said there's a little tension, and that's an understatement. There's a lot of tension between, giving the money away at one end of the spectrum and lending it at market rates at the other end of the spectrum, and where you strike the balance between those. And we've given our grantees quite a bit of flexibility there. I think the two programs, National Clean Investment Fund, Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, are at their core lending programs. So the majority of the financial assistance in those programs will be loans. However, as Nina mentioned, things like pre-development expenses and things like that can be covered. And so by pairing up something like, I mean, you think about pre-development on a project, it can take a long time. It can be expensive, and it happens before you even get the loan. And so unless you have the wherewithal and the financing to do those pre-development activities, you're not going to have a chance of getting the loan to do the actual project. By being able to finance those things or fund those things, you reduce the size of the loan that's needed, because typically you'd roll those into the loan, but you also are providing the capacity building necessary to those institutions or those individuals or those businesses or those community organizations that might need the capacity in order to come in then and get the very specific loan to do the very specific piece of work that needs to be done. So we're really hopeful, and I think, you know, listening to Nenha talk about their design is exactly what we had in mind of how you deliver and how you build the capacity and how you address that tension between, you know, we want returns and we want to be able to recycle this money so we can do more of that, but we also want to ensure that it is really reaching the communities and the individuals that we're targeting here. And sometimes that means you have to be concessionary in how you do that. And I think they're thinking really creatively about how to do that.
Can I
Oh,
add
anything to
something
add?
here?
Yeah, I was going to say, anything to add on that?
Yeah, well, so one on just the capacity to actually apply for federal funding, et cetera. Earlier this month, we launched in partnership with philanthropy, the Michigan Justice 40 Accelerator. So we picked 25 organizations across the state of Michigan that are community-based organizations that are receiving funding, technical assistance, and direct access to, you know, my office on a regular basis to make sure that we're getting these opportunities to them and building the capacity for them to actually apply. And then I think your original question was sort of like, how are we balancing the challenge between grants, loans, with like market rate at one end of the spectrum, full subsidy at the other end of the spectrum. I think the way that I've been asking my team on the Solar for All program, you know, we want to maximize emissions reduced, we want to maximize benefits to communities, and we want to make investments that we think will be transformational. That last one may be that that we need to do something that is sustaining over time, in which case we need to figure out how to make sure that the program sustains. But it also might be that the transformational thing is to invest and really build out a market in Michigan at a moment when it doesn't, when there are a bunch of barriers to entry, and that is actually our investment in the future, not that we continue to make a loan in the future. It's like we provide the money to get it over the hump, maybe. So
that it sustains itself. So the market sort of sustains itself. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think we're trying to think across the board, and that's the way we're approaching things with NCIF. That's the way we're thinking about things with CCIA as well. And so it may be that we come with tools that are ongoing, but we're trying to also identify opportunities where we can have that transformational impact that hopefully then, like a good example is, you know, when I worked in the PACE market, we constantly heard folks saying like, well, we've never done a deal there, so we don't have an accounting firm, we don't have legal documents drafted. Like the first transaction is going to cost us more money, so it has to be fatter for us to actually participate in your market until that project comes along. We're just going to go somewhere where we already have all that paperwork and all of that pipeline together. So I think for us, we're interested in finding ways that with state, you know, support, are there opportunities to try and lower those barriers to entry, and figure out how to
overcoming inertia, right? Like you're overcoming the newness of it. I think Ted, you mentioned lowering the risk for people, and sometimes the unknown is the biggest risk, right? That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would actually love to jump in on Cory's point about market building. I think that's also like what a fantastic opportunity with Solar for All, because it's in every single state. And there are many states that don't have a market, or very, very small, or very nascent, let me use that, a very nascent market, including the Dakotas. So even to Cory's point, like if you can't get it as robust as you want, just being able to plant the seed for the market to grow, to have a solid foundation, because that's the ultimate goal, is for private sector individuals to feel like these are areas that they can invest in. And that's where the equity piece comes in, because we don't want to have gaps. This is truly a nationwide program, but you don't want to have pockets of the country where no one's being served or no one's being connected to a clean part of the grid. And so I think that's the really cool part about Solar for All is like you're going to have every single state. And if they're not, I know there's a handful of states that don't have awards, but they're part of a regional approach. We're all figuring out how to build out these markets in a way. So it's market transformation from like the capital standpoint, but also market transformation from like actually creating the opportunity to make these investments in some parts of the countries where it doesn't currently exist.
Okay. Well, I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I do want to move to audience questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. But just, final question from me is what, we've talked about the historic nature of this, the scale of it, the fact that it's crossing so many different states and different levels, but it's a big deal. But what is the one piece of this that really is exciting for you? And if there's time, or maybe because of the time, I'll say, or what are one of the major challenges or obstacles you still see that you're grappling with? And we'll go backwards this time. Nina, why don't we start with you? Well, then we'll go Cory and Ted.
I'll say the opportunity that I am grateful for the time in which I'm able to join this work. I joined Coalition for Green Capital to work on the application. So it's quite remarkable to kind of be through the whole process and now be into implementation. I go to a lot of events. I talk to a lot of folks in different communities across the country. Everyone's really excited about this. And energy touches everyone. And so the ability to use the federal resources to create an industrial policy that's rooted in justice and equity is really an honor to be a part of. So I'm really excited on the long term to see how all of these investments will impact our built and social environments across the country.
All right, I'm going with a challenge. I think, and I'm going to make an appeal to everyone on this call to this regard, but I think that what I hear every time I talk to national award recipients, when I talk to folks trying to get in the market, philanthropy, trying to support the development of the market, advocates, is that we need more project pipeline and like investable projects. So that there is that. I also hear from project developers, et cetera, and from my own experience, there's some level of like, well, if the barrier were just simply having the investment grade projects ready to go, we probably could have invested in those like before through other means, or we would have found capital in some way. I think that there's this piece where it's like, how do you make sure that the capital is helping drive new investments and helping make it easier for project developers to develop out pipelines that they know they have investment on the back end for. So I think that there's that kind of like tension that can seem like a chicken or an egg, but it's actually just like we need to do both at the same time. I think for this group, I don't know how many folks are in the finance side of the house. Obviously, that's an exciting thing for those folks to maybe play a role in the capital stack as it gets built out on these projects. But assuming that a number of these folks are project developers, I think like really getting engaged in what that pipeline development looks like, engaging directly with lenders and participants in these programs to figure out what do they need to see to be able to invest in a project from you or a pipeline that you've developed out. I think that's one of the biggest challenges is like, we need to retrofit 2 million buildings in Michigan to meet our climate targets. We got to figure out how to do that, and we got to figure out we need to leverage this money to do so. So I think some of the project development is one of the bigger challenges in that connection.
Okay.
So I'll jump on what both Nina and Cory said. The thing that I think we're most excited about from our perspective, we went through a rigorous competition to choose the intermediaries who are now the grantees who will be administering this program, and we ended up selecting 68 entities across those 3 programs, and they are outstanding organizations that have long histories and deep experience doing this kind of work. And so we're just so excited to have them as our partners, helping us deliver on the promise of this program. That's what we're most excited about. And Nina's group and a few others have actually delivered a few early wins. We actually have some funded projects on the board already, and that's really exciting to begin talking about those. In terms of challenges, I would echo what Cory says and echo the challenge that he throws down, which is, we also need to make sure there's a pipeline of projects. And so everyone working their networks to be sure we're driving projects toward these entities is going to be critically important to us achieving these goals. So that to me, I think is the biggest challenge for us over the next 12 months as all these programs roll out. We are just beginning to roll these programs out. The National Clean Investment Fund, those 3 organizations are running with their funds already. Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, those entities are still building out their network of community lenders, so that money's not quite on the street yet. And as Cory said, for Solar for All of those organizations are just now finishing up their program plans and budgets. They'll be doing that over the next 60 or 90 days. And then they'll be able to begin their programs. So that money's not quite on the street yet, but it soon will be. And so I think the challenge will be ensuring that we have pipeline to deliver.
Well, it looks like our audience is excited to be part of that pipeline. A couple of questions here are about, how do we find out more information applying for funding at the local level? And the question was, is funding already been allocated? And it sounds like some has and some hasn't to sub-grantees. But if you can right now or afterwards, you can share with us just links of where you can find out how to apply or application process and what people should be considering as they look to pull together an application.
Sure, absolutely. It depends. The question about how do you apply? The question is, if you're a financial institution and you want to apply to be a participant under CCIA, for example, it's going to be different than if you're a building developer who has a project or portfolio of projects you want to get funded. That said, all of our grantees under the first 2 programs, NCIF and CCIA, have intake portals, and you can access those through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund main website, ggrf.epa.gov, or GGRF. I'll drop the link here in the chat. And there are the 3 different programs, and within each of those, you'll see the grantees. And there's information, their program plan is included there, so you can see what they're actually planning on doing with the funding, as well as an intake portal where you can put in a request for information or propose projects or propose participation. So they all have those. We will have the same for Solar for All once we have the final program plans, as I was saying, over the next 60 to 90 days. What we currently have for Solar for All is a list of all of the selectees, the grantees now, and the jurisdictions that they're serving. So if you're in New Mexico, if you're in Michigan, you can go on today and find out who is the recipient for your state, and you can begin having contact with them about solar projects in your state. So
and just a question, so if you have a portfolio that crosses states, I know, National Bank, you may be able to facilitate a little bit of that, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we've had, so we're already doing due diligence on several pipelines that we've received, again, through our sub-awardees, through some of our partners that we've had from the American Green Bank Consortium. We have an intake form on our website, and then we're going to have a rolling request for proposals to just get information about projects. So we'll have an open solicitation, but there are currently links on our website in which you can see, especially at the portfolio level, which we would love portfolios of projects to be able to do them in single transactions. And then there's an Excel spreadsheet associated with the portfolio level interests. And that's actually great for you to see the level of detail of information that we need. Because in addition to, great resources from EPA, we also have hefty compliance requirements. And so as a heads up for everyone, as you are working with us, we will be requesting a lot of information because there's a lot of reporting to ensure that the American public has the ability to look up how their money is being spent. So just look to being partners with us when it comes to compliance. But yeah, we're open for business, as you said earlier.
And again, if you have those links, please throw them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll also follow up with you and get those into the response when we send you the recording. I do have a question here. I'm going to combine some just for time. It's saying the funds are designed for nonprofits. There's an example here of somebody that's an energy storage solutions provider. own and operate energy storage facilities, would a for-profit developer have an opportunity to access these funds? And what would be the grant to loan ratio? I'm not sure if you can speak to that yet. And what is the rate of the loan? There's probably more specificity than you can give, but private sector can get these funds. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So any entity, private, public, for-profit, nonprofit, individual company, et cetera, would be eligible to apply for these funds. Again, as Nina started to touch on, there are specific requirements about what is an eligible project. And then 2 of the 3 programs, so the Solar for All and the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, that project also must be in and benefit low-income and disadvantaged communities. The 3rd program, NCIF, National Clean Investment Fund, it will be about 60% focused on low-income and disadvantaged communities, meaning 40% can be outside of that. So it will just, as long as the project fits within the qualified category and is serving the communities intended, they are eligible for funding. I can't speak to the rates and terms or the ratio of grant loan. Those are decisions that our individual grantees are making, largely based on their underwriting, based on the needs, based on the communities being served. So I can't speak to that at the macro level, but it is certainly worth contacting one of the grantees about a project to understand what the opportunity might be.
We do have more questions. Unfortunately, we are not going to have time to get to them. And I think there's been a request for some contact information. We'll sort of follow up with the folks and see what they're comfortable with sharing and share what we can in the follow-up afterwards. I do want to close with a couple of comments. I think, first of all, as we mentioned at the top, the energy transition may be inevitable, but the equity piece isn't. And I'll say that it's going to take a conscious effort and it's going to take resources to make sure that the new economy is both clean and fair. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and honestly, all the work that each of you, all the parts that each of you is playing, is clearly going to be an essential component of that. So just a huge thank you for the work that you're actually doing in this space, as well as obviously for joining us today. So thank you for that. I also want to take a second to recognize Ellen Wang and Daphne Aslan, who 2 of our former interns who wrote a blog on this topic. That'll be put in the chat and also shared with you. Thank you both for your work on that. And I also want to thank you for joining us. If you're not yet a member of E2, please, we'd love to have you. Please, you're welcome to join us. Go to e2.org/join. And if you are a member, I want to flag that we're hosting a virtual holiday networking event next December, in December 3rd at 1:30 Eastern. You'll get an invitation in your inbox, but we hope to see you then. With a minute to go, just many, many, many thanks. This is an exciting time. It's the beginning. We will come back and check. Really also excited about the measurability of this. We're going to be tracking the clean energy economy, and we're really looking forward to seeing the equity improvement over time. And this is going to be a key part of that. So thank you all very, very much for your time and for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.